Do I hear $10 for this fine herd?
Will you teach me what Pa couldn't?
They'd have laughed you off the porch. It wasn't a fortune. It was, near as anyone could figure, simply what 41 had a good stock were actually worth, which was the whole scandal. Because in Bishop County, a widow's cattle never sold for what they were worth. They sold for what a certain man decided to offer, and everyone signed, because everyone needed the money before the mortgage came due. That fall, on a cold auction morning, a hand went up before the usual buyers did, and said a number nobody in that yard had ever heard spoken out loud. A boy watched it happen from the top rail of the fence. He was about to ask a harder question than any auctioneer ever had. It would be months before that question got its full answer. Months of rope burns and green calves, and a father's old ledger pulled down off a shelf it hadn't been touched in a year. Months that ended, in the end, at a stockyard scale with the whole county watching a needle finally tell the truth. It had been lying about for 11 years. But it started with $640, and a man named Nate Bishop, who had his own reasons for knowing exactly what a fair price cost a person who'd never been offered one. He just hadn't planned on those reasons finding a 12-year-old boy to attach themselves to. Daniel Hargrove had been sick the better part of 2 years before the sickness finally won, and a man dying slow doesn't get to teach his son much of anything. He left behind a widow, 41 head of cattle, debts the county bank wasn't inclined to forgive on schedule, and a boy named Eli who had inherited his father's hat before he'd inherited anything else worth having. It sat too big on him. Always would. For a while yet, Rebecca Hargrove, Beck, to the few who'd earned it, held the ranch together a full year on stubbornness and short rations before the bank's patience ran out and the county scheduled the estate auction. Everyone in Bishop County knew what that meant. Everyone knew who'd be doing the buying. Orrin Bardwell had bought cheap from desperate people for 11 years and called it service. He owned the only certified stockyard scale within 40 miles, which meant he controlled, in a practical sense, what every rancher's herd was worth on paper, a fact that made him, at every for sale in the county, the buyer nobody could afford to outbid, and nobody dared to, widows especially. A grieving woman with a mortgage clock, running rarely had the stomach for a bidding war she'd likely lose anyway. Bardwell knew that arithmetic better than anyone alive. He'd built a stockyard empire on it, one desperate sale at a time, and the county had gotten so used to the pattern that nobody thought to call it what it was. Not until that October. Nate Bishop farmed the section next to the Hargrove place, and had, in the years since Daniel died, made himself useful in the quiet, unremarkable way of a man who doesn't need thanking. He'd mended fence he hadn't been asked to mend. He'd hauled water during the dry spell without being seen doing it. Mid-40s, unmarried, no children. The town had long since stopped speculating why, and simply accepted him as a fixture, dependable as weather. What Bishop County didn't know about Nate, what he'd never once mentioned in the 11 years he'd ranched that section, was that he understood exactly what it cost a person to watch everything they had priced by someone else's convenience. He'd learned it the same year. He learned to shave. He hadn't planned to teach that lesson again. Circumstances, it turned out, had other plans. Auction day came clear and hard-frosted. Half the county turned out the way half the county always turned out for another family's misfortune. Respectfully at a distance, hats in hand. Bardwell opened, as he always opened, low. $15 a head. He offered, for stock that any honest buyer in Omaha would have started bidding at $25. The auctioneer, who worked for Bardwell more often than not, moved to close it before anyone else could speak. That was when Nate Bishop's hand went up from the back of the yard. $640, he said, plain as weather, full price, every head. The yard went silent enough to hear the wind working the fence wire. Bardwell turned around slow, the way a man turns when he's just heard an insult dressed as a number. Nobody outbid him. Nobody tried. $640 changed hands before noon. Cash counted twice on a plank table, and Rebecca Hargrove signed the bill of sale with a hand that hadn't stopped shaking since the auctioneer first opened his mouth. By supper was the only thing Bishop County was discussing. Not with outrage, exactly, but with a particular unsettled quiet of people realizing a rule they'd lived under for years had just been shown to be nobody's rule but one man's habit: full price. Folks kept saying, turning the two words over like a coin they weren't sure was counterfeit. Full price. Orrin Barwell said nothing to anyone that day. He went back to his scale house and did the kind of arithmetic that doesn't show up on any bill of sale. Eli Hargrove had watched the whole exchange from the top rail. His father's had sliding down over his eyebrows every time he leaned forward, and he'd understood, the way children understand the shape of things before they understand the reasons, that something rare had just happened in that yard. A grown man had paid what a thing was actually worth. Nobody had made him. In the weeks after, Nate kept coming around the Hargrove place the same as before. A hinge here, a bad well pumped there, no bill ever mentioned, and Eli started finding reasons to be nearby when he did, watching his hands, the way he read a gate before opening it, a cow before roping it. Things Eli was coming to understand that his father had never had the years left to show him. 25%. It was a Sunday, the two of them alone at the fence line, Nate checking a post that didn't strictly need checking, when the boy finally said the thing he'd been working up to for a month. Mr. Bishop. The hat slid down again. He pushed it back with the heel of his hand. Will you teach me what Pa couldn't? Nate went still in the particular way of a man who has just been handed something heavier than he expected. I'm not your father. Boy. It came out harder than he meant it, and he heard it land wrong the moment it did. Eli's chin dropped an inch. Nate looked at that too big, had a long moment, and found the rest of the sentence. But I'll teach you everything I know, he said, and we'll call it a debt. Paid forward, not back. Eli didn't understand that part yet. He would, before the year was out. The lesson started small, the way good instruction always does. How to build a loop that wouldn't slip wrong. How to read a herd's mood in the set of their ears before they ever moved a foot. How to doctor a sick calf without spooking its mother into doing something worse. Eli was clumsy first, then earnest, then, by degrees that surprised even Nate, genuinely good. He asked the kind of questions his father would have loved answering. If illness had left him the years to, Nate answered every one. Patient as a man paying off an old account, which, though the boy didn't know it yet, was exactly what he was doing. Some Sundays, Beck watched the two of them from the porch a long while before calling them in to supper. She never said what she was thinking. She didn't have to. He told Eli the rest of it on a slow ride back from checking the north fence, the boy handling his own horse well enough now that the conversation could carry without interruption. His own father, Nate said, had died when Nate was 12. Same age Eli was now. A wagon accident. Quick and senseless, the kind that doesn't leave time for lessons or last words either one. A neighbor named Tillman had taken the boy under his wing that same winter, taught him roping cattle and patience, asked for nothing back, and told him once, plain as anything, that the only proper payment for a kindness like that was passing along to somebody else when his own turn came. Took me 30 years to find who, Nate said. Didn't know I was looking to your pa's auction. Eli was quiet the rest of the ride. Not sad quiet. The other kind. While Nate was busy teaching a boy how to be a rancher, Orrin Barwell was busy remembering exactly how he'd become one. 11 years. He'd run the only certified scale in the county, and 11 years that scale had been calibrated, quietly, carefully, a hair at a time, to read light. Not enough to notice on any single sale. Enough, across 11 years and every desperate widow and mortgage rancher in the county, to build a stockyard empire on numbers nobody had ever thought to question. Nate Bishop's $640 hadn't just cost him one sale. It had shown the whole county that the scale wasn't the only way to price a thing. That was a lesson Orrin Barwell had no intention of letting spread. Fall shipping season was 6 weeks out. Every rancher in Bishop County would need a scale before it was over. 50%. The notice went up at the stockyard in September, hand-lettered, apologetic in tone and absolute in substance. Scale under repair. Weighing suspended until further notice. It applied as it happened, almost exclusively to 2 ranches, Bishop's and Hargrove's, whose herds needed certified weight before they could ship a single head to the railhead buyers waiting in Omaha. Everyone else's cattle, curiously, kept moving through those pens just fine. The rest of the county grumbled about it privately and shipped their own stock quietly, the way people do when they've depended on a monopoly too long to risk crossing out loud. Nate understood the message precisely. Pay the price of being humbled, or lose the whole season's income waiting on repairs that weren't coming. He had 6 weeks to decide which. Nate and Eli kept working combined herd anyway, because a rancher who stops working while he waits on justice generally starves waiting. Eli's roping had gone from clumsy to genuinely useful that season. He could cut a calf in the herd clean now, doctor screw-worm wound without flinching, red, whether in a way that made Nate quietly proud in the manner of men who don't say the word aloud. It was Eli, going through his father's old desk for a missing bill of lading, who found the ledger, Daniel Hargrove's hand, careful and small, recording every sale for 6 years back. Weights, prices, dates. Eli brought it to Nate, without quite understanding what he'd found. Only that the numbers looked wrong against the herds he remembered his father describing. Nate looked at 3 years of entries and understood immediately. Every single weight was light, by almost exactly the same margin every time. He rode to the county seat inside the week, Daniel's ledger in his saddlebag alongside 3 years of his own careful records, and asked the clerk of weights and measures the one question that mattered. When had anyone last tested Orrin Barbell's scale? The answer, never, not since its original certification, 11 years back, told him everything the ledger hadn't. The state kept traveling inspectors for exactly this purpose, calibrated test weights and all, and the clerk, once he understood what he was looking at, wired for one without being asked twice. Shipping day, Nate told him. Have him their shipping day. Let every rancher in the county see it at once. Not just Nate Bishop's word against a scale house that had never once been questioned. The inspector wired back within 2 days. He would come. Barbell heard about the request before the inspector's train did. Word moved fast in a county that size, and he came to the Bishop place himself, hat in hand, an offer already rehearsed. He'd buy the whole combined herd, he said. Generous terms. Above market. Even, he could afford to be generous, a man in his position. No need to trouble a state inspector over a scale that had served the county faithfully for 11 years. No need to trouble anyone at all. Nate let him finish the whole speech before answering. 11 years, he said, is exactly the problem, Orrin. Bardwell's rehearsed warmth went cold at the edges. He left without shaking hands, which told Nate more than the offer had. Word of the refusal reached the cattlemen's, exchanged the same evening, and Bardwell, drinking with a business associate, allowed himself the confidence of a man who'd survived worse threats than one stubborn rancher's grudge. Let him bring his inspector, he said, turning his glass slow. I calibrated that scale myself. 11 years, nobody's questioned a single reading. A dry laugh, not entirely convincing even to himself. We'll see whose numbers hold up on shipping day. Shipping day was set for the second week of October. The whole county's fall herds due through those pens inside 3 days. The railhead buyers waiting in Omaha on a schedule that wouldn't bend for anybody's pride. Every rancher in Bishop County would be there. So would the inspector. The stockyard filled before dawn on the appointed morning, wagons and riders and lowing cattle crowding the pens the way they did every October. Except this October. Nobody was in a hurry to get their own herd weighed first. Barbell stood at his scale house in his good vest, greeting ranchers by name, betraying nothing. The inspector arrived on the 9 o'clock train, a gray, unhurried man with a heavy case of calibrated iron weights and the particular patience of someone who has done this exact thing in 100 other counties. He didn't ask permission. He didn't need to. He simply set his case on the scale platform, in front of God and Bishop County both, and began. Known weights first. 100 pounds exact, then 200, then 5. Each block lowered onto the platform with the inspector calling the true figure aloud before the needle even settled. The scale red light every time. Not wildly. Not enough that any single rancher, watching his own herd cross it once a year, would ever have caught it. But consistent, 6, 7, 8% under, block after block. The same quiet theft repeated with mechanical patience for 11 years. The inspector wrote the figures in his book without comment, the way honest men do work that doesn't require embellishing. The whole county watched the needle lie in broad daylight and understood all at once exactly what full price had actually cost Nate Bishop to offer. Nothing. It had simply been honest. Bardwell tried the sentence he'd rehearsed for the exchange. Mechanical drift, ordinary wear, no cause for alarm, and got exactly as far as the county clerk holding up Daniel Hargrove's ledger for the crowd to see. 6 years of entries. The same margin, sale after sale, going back further than anyone had thought to check. A dead man's careful handwriting, it turned out, could testify as plainly as any living witness. And it did that morning, in front of the very crowd Bardwell had spent 11 years quietly shorting. The scale house lost its county certification before noon. A cooperative scale, jointly bonded by a dozen ranchers, was running by the following spring. Bardwell kept his stockyard. He never again controlled a single number that came off it. Eli's cattle, his mother's herd, folded now into Nate's own, crossed an honest scale for the first time that afternoon, the needle settling on numbers nobody had to wonder about. He stood beside Nate at the rail watching it happen. His father's hat still a size too big, though it sat differently on him now than it had in the spring. Full price, Nate said quietly, nodding at the reading. That's what your pa's herd was worth all along. Eli was quiet a moment, working through something. You already answered my question, he said finally, back at the fence. You just didn't finish it yet. Nate looked at him. Finish it now then. Eli thought about that and did. You taught me everything Pa would have, and you taught me why. They branded together the following May. The Hargrove and Bishop herds run as one outfit, by then in everything but name. Beck keeping the books the way her husband once had, only honestly weighed now. Eli worked the branding fire himself that spring, 13 and steady-handed, showing a younger Kessler cousin how to hold a calf still without hurting it, patient the way a man had once been patient with him. Nate watched from the fence rail, arms crossed, saying nothing the way Tillman must once have watched him. Some debts, he'd come to understand, were never meant to be paid back to the man who gave them, only forward, full price every time, in dollars once, in years since, for exactly what a boy was worth, and exactly what a promise was worth, and exactly what it cost a county, in the end, to finally weigh both correctly.